Mr. President,
Senator Gazelka.
I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant of Arms be instructed to bring in the absentee members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the Sergeant at Arms will bring in the absent members. Members, please stand for the prayer. Today's chaplain is Pastor John Campbell from Life Church in Bloomington, Minnesota. And following the prayer, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for the gift of today and for the men and the women who serve in our state and the leadership demands that are required in the Senate. Provide our leaders with reminders each day of why they decided to dedicate their lives to serve the people in the state of our Minnesota. Give them peace when their work demands overtime hours as well as taking them away from their homes. Bless the wives, husbands, and children of our members. We ask that you draw them near and give them the wisdom on how to best support one another while their loved ones are away attending to the state's business. Father, we are so grateful to be living in a beautiful part of our nation where those in this room play a part in making sure that the needs and desires of Minnesotans are heard and dealt with. As we ask you that you guide them to speak respectfully and with humility to one another, showing respect for those that they interact with, and be on an advocate for their constituents. Again, we thank you, God, for all that you've done and given us.
The Secretary will take the roll.
Senators Abler, Anderson B., Anderson P., Bach, Benson, Bigham, Carlson, Chamberlain, Champion, Clausen, Cohen, Swazinski, Dames, Dibble, Draheim, Dietzick, Eaton, Eichhorn, Eakin, Franzen, Friends, Gazelka, Goggin, Hall, Herr, Hayden, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Ingebrigtsen, Isaacson, Jasinski, Jensen, Johnson, Kent, Kiffmeyer, Klein, Coran, Lane, Lang, Latz, Limmer, Little, Marty, Matthews, Miller, Nelson, Newman, Newton, Osmick, Pappas, Pratt, Rarick, Ralph, Rest, Rosen, Rude, Senjum, Simonson, Sparks, Tomasoni, Torres, Ray, Utke, Weber, Westrom, Uyghur, Wickland.
A quorum is present. Members will begin today on the Senate agenda with the third order of business, messages from the House. The Secretary will read the message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce that the House has acceded to the request of the Senate for the appointment of a conference committee consisting of 3 members of the House on amendments adopted by the House of the following Senate File 1743, a bill for an act relating to education. There has been appointed as such committee on the part of the House Christensen, Yoakum, and Erdahl. Senate File number 1743 is herewith returned to the Senate. Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives. Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following House files herewith transmitted. House Files number 10, 679, 680, 892, and 1503. Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
There's no action required on those messages. And members, I know it's Monday and everyone's excited to be back, but it is a little loud. If we can just keep the volume down a little bit in the chamber. Thank you. We will move to the fourth order of business, first reading of House bills. The House files listed in today's Senate agenda will be given their first reading and referred as indicated. Moving to the fifth order of business, reports of committees. In addition to the committee reports listed, the Secretary will read one additional report.
Senator Gazelka from the Committee on Rules and Administration, to which was re-referred Senate File 751, a bill for an act relating to health establishing an opiate epidemic response, reports the same back with the recommendation that the bill do pass and be re-referred to the Committee on Finance.
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, I move the committee reports printed in the agenda and read by the Secretary be adopted with the exception of reports pertaining to Joint Rule 2.03.
On the adoption of the committee reports, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. Moving to the sixth order of business, second reading of Senate bills. The Secretary will read the Senate file numbers.
Senate file numbers 1004, 445, and 1351.
Second reading. Moving to the eighth order of business, introduction and first reading of Senate bills. Members listed in today's Senate bill introduction calendar are Senate files 2643 through 2682. We do have two changes. The first one is on page 3, Senate file 2661 will be referred to the Committee on Human Services Reform, Finance, and Policy. And Senate file 2680 will be referred to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, Policy, and Legacy Finance. These bills are given their first reading and referred as indicated. Moving to the ninth order of business, motions and resolutions. There are several authors' motions listed in the agenda. We'll take these authors' motions as one motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. Continuing under motions and resolutions, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate File 1452, number 109 on general orders, be stricken and re-referred to the Committee on Finance. I guess there's things that we need to look at because it costs some money.
All right, Senator Howe, and this is your bill?
Yes, Mr. President, it's my bill.
Any discussion on the Howe motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Remaining under motions and resolutions, Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bills to be made for special orders for immediate consideration. Member, the special order sheet is on your desk.
Members, the first bill up for consideration is number 51 on general orders. It is Senate File 1618. Senator JENSEN.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, today I present Senate File 1618. And this is a bittersweet moment because it's in saying a goodbye to someone who made a commitment to serve his community in light of the fact that he died while in the line of duty. Jeff Vollmer joined the Mayer Fire Department as a volunteer in his 20s and served in such a fashion for 12 years until 1 week before Christmas in the line of training, he suffered a heart attack and died. He leaves behind a wife, Emily, of 11 years, Annika and Kennedy, his children, and the community suffers from his loss period. Jeff Vollmer's service to the Volunteer Fire Department reminds me much of the service that our veterans give us in the military. When these folks return to their community lives, they demonstrate and model to us what community service is all about. Jeff Vollmer's passing was particularly bittersweet for me because in my role as a family practice doctor, we would occasionally have to call a 911 emergency and have first responders there for patients that were having cardiac difficulties of an extreme nature in our office. And Jeff Vollmer would come to my office and help me out. So, colleagues, I stand for questions on Senate File 1618, which is designed to name a portion of Highway 25 from Highway 7 to Highway 30 as the Captain Jeffrey Vollmer Memorial Highway, and the Commissioner shall adopt a suitable design to mark this highway. Thank you.
Further discussion on Senate File 1618. The Secretary will give Senate File 1618 its third reading.
Senate File number 1618 relating to transportation, donating a portion of Mark Trunk Highway 25 as Captain Jeffrey Vollmer Memorial Highway.
Third reading. Final discussion on Senate File 1618. Senator JENSEN.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say this only. With profound gratitude, I thank my co-authors, Senator Osmick and Senator Paul Anderson and Senator Howe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on Senate File 1618? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll. All senators having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 64 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill up for consideration is number 27 on general orders, House File 50, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, House File 50 is the hands-free cell phone bill that has been moving through the legislature this session. In my estimation, it's a very, very important bill for all of us to consider. To me, cell phones in the 21st century are what electricity was to people in the 19th century, and what the internal combustion engine was to folks in the 20th century. And the comparison is this: it has completely changed our culture. Today, with the advent of the cell phone, around the world, people are literally tethered to it. You can't go anywhere without seeing and watching people use their cell phone on a constant daily basis. So it's no wonder that we take the cell phones into the cars with us when we begin to travel. In my estimation, operating a motor vehicle on the highway today is probably the most dangerous daily activity that most of us enter into. But when we take that cell phone along and we introduce the use of that cell phone in that dangerous activity of driving, we have just increased the danger exponentially. Now, I know that this bill today does come with some controversy. What's kind of odd about it is the inconsistency with which it is controversial. Inconsistent in that some people are opposed to the bill because they feel it's a personal right or a personal freedom issue, whereas other folks think it's a public safety issue. Some people think it's an issue of the penalties. They will tell me that the penalty in your bill is too light, whereas the penalty should be much, much harsher. So for the purposes of the bill today, what I would ask you of is this. Listen to what I have to say. I've got a number of documents I'm going to bring your attention to and ask that you look at, and after which then exercise your right to vote in accordance with your conscience. House File 50, first of all, amends two different statutes. It amends the definition of a wireless communications device, and secondly, it currently changes a statute which currently allows you to use a cell phone to make a phone call while you are driving your car. Those are the two big changes insofar as the statutes are concerned. Now, insofar as the organization of the bill is concerned, it is divided up into a couple of different parts, and I want to just briefly touch on those because I think it'll help you follow the bill a little bit. First of all, it gives you a number of definitions, i.e. the wireless communications device, and then it gives you definitions under the use of a wireless communications device. Notably, one of the definitions that is included now is whether or not a car is in motion or part of traffic, and or whether it's parked on the side of the road. And that's an important part of the definitions of this bill. Next, the bill indicates what are the prohibited uses of the cell phone while you're in your car. Next, it goes to the penalty provision in the bill. And the penalty provision in the bill I want to specifically bring to your attention, currently under texting law, it's a $50 fine for the first offense. Under House File 50, the first offense is a $50 fine. Under the second or subsequent offense, it's a $300 fine. Never does the penalty in House File 50 go over a petty misdemeanor. A petty misdemeanor is, by legal definition in the state of Minnesota, not a crime. So I would ask, please do not get House File 50, which I'm going to call the Newman bill, confused with Senate File 75, which I will call the Osmic bill. Two completely different bills. And the penalty provision in the Newman bill never goes over a petty misdemeanor. Finally, the bill itself then lists exceptions to the prohibitions, i.e. what is not covered and what you can do in terms of the use of your cell phone. There is an effective date, and that then resolves the complete bill. I do have an amendment, Mr. President, that I would like to offer at this time, and that is, I believe, the A50 amendment.
Senator Newman has the A50 amendment, A50. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Newman moves to amend House File Number 50 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 adopted by the Senate March 21, 2019 as follows. This is the A50 amendment.
To the A50 amendment, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, members, some question has arisen as to whether or not House File 50 would prohibit the use of cell phones on private property. I will tell you it has never been my intention to have this bill affect the use of cell phones while on private property. It has always been my intention that it would prohibit the use of making phone calls while you're on a public road. In point of fact, I think it would be advantageous to allow folks, while they're still sitting in their driveway, to download whatever information that you want to do, to type in whatever kind of phone number that you may have or any other kind of application. Do it while you are sitting in your private driveway before you get on the highway. And that is the purpose of the A50 amendment, Mr. President.
Members, it is still a little bit noisy. It's a little difficult to hear up here. So if you can please try to keep it down. Any further discussion on the A50 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the A50 amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I now want to turn to some documents that I want to briefly bring your attention to. I've had them passed out on the floor, and I believe that they are on your desks, in effect, in a packet. I have numbered each one of these exhibits that I'm going to bring your attention to, and if you would just follow along with me, I'll try and explain to you briefly what each one of them calls for. The first document, number 1. All I'm providing there for you is a quick reference chart to help you compare the current law with what is proposed in the Newman hands-free bill. I'm just hoping that by looking at that chart, it will be just a quick reference to help you understand the difference between what is being proposed and what is in current law. Next, members, I want to bring to your attention document number 2. Document number 2 is a list of the various hands-free supporters that have contacted me and submitted support. And if you will notice, and I have no intention of reading this to you, but I would ask you to look at it, because there's a lot of people involved in a lot of different organizations that have come out in public support of this hands-free bill. And all over the state of Minnesota, there are people that are supporting what we are proposing to do today with House File 50. The next item on the list is a letter from the Minnesota Sheriff's Association. That's item number 3. I'm bringing the letter from the Sheriff's Association to your attention simply because I want to bring to your attention the fact that law enforcement is in fact behind House File 50. They do support it. And those are the folks, of course, that are on the scene generally first to witness the carnage that has happened when somebody is abusing the use of their cell phone and injures or kills somebody on the highway. During the course of bringing this bill forward, I have had a lot of different opinions that have been provided to me as to whether or not this is a good idea or a bad idea. Some folks have argued to me that texting is a lot more dangerous than other forms of use of your cell phone while you are operating your motor vehicle. I've even had one individual tell me that all of the deaths in the state of Minnesota that have occurred as a result of using a cell phone have occurred as a result of texting. And I'm here to represent to you, members, that simply isn't true, and I'm going to do the very best that I can in a very short period of time to disabuse you of that notion. So first I want to bring your attention to exhibit number 4. Exhibit number 4, if you'll notice, it is simply just an example of some of the fatalities that have happened in the state of Minnesota while talking or listening on a cellular phone. Pope County, I think that's Senator Westrum's county. I'm not sure. Washington County, I think that's Senator Housley, Senator Chamberlain. Nobles County, Scott County, Kandiyohi County, Dakota County. Just a real brief list. Members, these are all accidents, they are all fatalities, and they all happened as a result of talking on the cell phone, not as a result of texting while driving. Exhibit number 5. Exhibit number 5 is as a result of an accident in my Senate district, District 18, Sibley County. And in this instance, there was a young driver who was using a social media app called Snapchat. I actually had to ask what Snapchat was. I didn't know what it was. Apparently, you take a photograph of something, send it to somebody else, and the photographs magically disappear after a very short period of time. I cannot imagine why that would be important while you're operating a motor vehicle. But in any event, Mr. Illig, who was 56 years old from New Prague, died as a result of somebody using Snapchat, not texting. Next, exhibit number 6. Exhibit number 6 involves a young woman by the name of Penny Verdick. She was from McLeod County. She's from Glencoe. That's also my district. This one's a little bit unusual because this actually went to a trial. And there are court findings in this one. It isn't just a newspaper article. And in this case, the accident occurred on a straight, flat stretch of road where Penny was riding her bicycle. The woman who killed her, according to the state troopers who reconstructed the accident, had her in sight for 17 seconds before impact. 17 seconds. In plain sight, and she ran Penny over and hit her right on the hood ornament, folded up the license plate on her car. The findings of the court was that she was not texting. Not texting. She was changing stations on an app called Pandora, something I use all the time, which essentially is just to change the music genre. But you have to get on your phone and go through things in order to do it. So another example of a horrible accident that occurred while someone was not texting, they were using your phone for something else. Number 7, document number 7. This is that awful crash down in Dodge County. Look at that little blonde girl. Look at her mother. The bozo that was driving the Hummer had it on cruise control and ran over this car as they were stopped in traffic to make a left-hand turn and killed that little girl and killed that mother. And you know what he was doing? Court documents say that Kuchenberg told investigators his cruise control was set at 60 while traveling on Highway 14, and he admitted he was on his cell phone talking with a friend. This is not a texting accident. This is a talking on the cell phone accident. Number 8, Dakota County. This is a case in which a motorist, while talking on her cell phone, blew through a stop sign, broadsided a car, and killed the passenger. Not texting, on her cell phone. Number 9. This is an accident that happened in Rock County. Andrea Beauvais, 33, is biking along the highway And this guy comes along and killed her. The man was on his cell phone when he hit this cyclist. On his cell phone, not texting, on his cell phone talking. And the last one I want to bring to your attention is this, number 10. This is an accident that happened in North Dakota. And it happened in rural North Dakota. This guy admitted he was out looking at people in some farmland or some vehicles on some farmland near the crash scene. I've included this because I had one person tell me that I live in a deeply rural area and there's nobody out here except me and the deer. And so I want to bring this to your attention. That ain't necessarily true. This is a guy, he was taking a selfie, of all things, while driving his car in rural North Dakota. And he killed this person. Now, how important is that selfie? He killed this person. And he wasn't texting. He was using his cell phone by taking a picture of himself. Members, the use of this cell phone is something that has just changed us so much. And it isn't just texting. It's phone calls, it's Snapchat, it's taking selfies, it's changing the radio station on Pandora. And we just have to stop doing this. In my view, I understand that there are many of you that believe that this is a personal liberty issue, and I'm here to tell you that the only personal liberty that is being taken away here is the right of the person who is occupying that road with you, and you kill them. That's the loss of the personal liberty. And we do not have a right to do that. So please consider House File 50. As we now continue the debate, I know we're going to be talking about amendments, but this is, in my estimation, a very important debate that all of you should participate in, because this isn't a personal liberty issue. This is a public safety issue that puts everyone in danger that we are using the highway with. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on House File 50, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to offer the A9 amendment, Mr. President.
Senator Lang has the A9 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Lang moves to amend House File number 50 as amended pursuant to Rule 45, page 1, line 12. This is the A9 amendment.
To the A9 amendment, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members and Senator Newman, I'm going to support this bill. I think it's a good bill. It's a movement towards something that I think here in the Senate we can actually make a difference on. I'd like to just, something that was brought up to me over the last couple of days is that really what this is a clarification for ham radio operators. And I know not many people here today in the Senate have operated a ham radio, but what this does is clarify exactly that there is a ham radio that uses electronic messaging is what it does. But it's, you key the mic and you use the ham radio and it sends the message just like any other electronic message, but we're just going and clarifying that those are exempt from this bill. So with that, Mr. President, I appreciate your support.
Further discussion on the A9 amendment, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, it has never been my intention to prohibit the use of two-way radios or amateur radio equipment in a motor vehicle. I think the bill addresses it, but the A9 amendment would remove any ambiguity, and I would consider this a friendly amendment.
Any further discussion on the A9 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Further discussion on House File 50, Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to Senator Newman. I think, members, this is a really important bill. It protects our public drivers from people that are just selfish and unsafe. I think that's the way I look at it, because I can look at myself. If I'm driving down the road and I want to use this thing, it's because I want to do something. There are times maybe that's really important. Most of the time it isn't. I don't like the way this is taking away my freedom, but it needs to be done for the sake of so many that are dying because others are being selfish. So I'm not going to like this, but it needs to be done, and it is going to be a cultural change in our driving. I know it is for me and my kids. It's going to be a cultural change, but it's going to be a really good one, kind of like putting seatbelts on. I didn't like that either, but I found that it was not only safe for me, but other drivers. So I want to say thank you to Senator Newman, and I would vote yes on this.
Further discussion on House File 50, Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Newman yield for a question?
Senator Newman will yield. Senator Champion.
Senator Newman, thank you for your articulation of the various incidences that has occurred in the state of Minnesota, but it appears that the incidents that you've articulated are all secondary offenses, such as something else happened and then you found out information later that someone may have unfortunately used a cell phone or something of that nature. If what I'm saying is true, then can you tell me why this bill would also or could also be used as a primary offense?
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, under current law, a texting violation is a primary offense. The difference, of course, with a secondary offense, the law enforcement does not have the right to stop just for that. They have to have a different reason. This bill, House File 50, would be a primary offense. It would be my intention that if law enforcement saw people on their cell phone, that they would have the ability to pull them over and, if necessary, give them a ticket for a primary offense.
Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Newman, will you continue to yield for a question?
Senator Newman will continue to yield. Senator Champion.
So, Senator Newman, you have talked about if law enforcement sees a person using their phone, that they could potentially pull them over or stop them. Can you tell me what would happen in a situation where a person who may be Somali, who would have a scarf and the phone is not being used with her hands but was placed in her scarf, but she still has the ability to speak? Would that be a violation of this law even though she was not using her hands?
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, it would be my view that placing the cell phone in a scarf or any other kind of apparatus would in fact be in violation under this bill. And I think that it would be covered under line 2.5, which talks in terms of an attachment or an accessory. The headscarf, in my view, is not part of the accessory for a cell phone. Somehow or another, that cell phone is going to have to be activated and placed in the scarf or in that area and removed. So, in my view, it would be a violation.
Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Newman continue to yield for a question?
The author will continue to yield. Senator Champion.
Senator Newman, you do recognize that an accessory, your bill, let me go back. You said that the line that will cover this is where, Senator Newman? Is that line 2.5? Thank you, Senator Newman. I see the nod of your head, so I'm going to take that as an affirmative. If you look at line 2.5, it says hand-free mode means an attachment accessory. It does not indicate that it has to be a mobile linked accessory. So can you please, with clarity, tell me exactly how that reads? Because I did raise this in finance, and if you are a fashion connoisseur, which I believe that you are, that you recognize that a scarf is an accessory, and the way your bill is written, it would seem to suggest that any accessory would be appropriate. So can you tell me with clarity and with certainty where on line 2.5, outside of just seeing the line or the word accessory, that the scenario that I presented to you would not apply?
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, Senator Champion has in effect asked me for my view or my opinion. And I am clearly stating that, in my opinion, placing a cell phone in a headscarf would in fact be a violation under this bill. The accessory that is mentioned on line 2.5, in my mind, is an accessory adaptable to cell phones and cell phone use, not a piece of clothing.
Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Newman continue to yield for a question?
Senator Newman will continue to yield. Senator Champion.
Senator Newman, would you agree or not agree is that you have rendered your opinion, but the language as it articulated in 2.5 remains unclear, and that perhaps that an amendment would be appropriate? Because you have been a judge in the past, or at least an administrative law judge, and that the whole reason why we have lawyers is because lawyers also look at language that is proposed and see it differently. Would you not agree with that? And if so, what language do you suggest that would make it much clearer that a person of Somali descent, if she is using, or any person, not just a Somali person, but any person who's using a scarf and they are operating hands-free, because that's what it says, hands-free mode, that by using a scarf in order to hold a phone would not be a violation because the person would be using both of their hands on the steering wheel?
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, as I've stated, I believe the bill is clear on that. And if an amendment is presented, I would most certainly take a look at it, as I have with a former amendment, and I suspect more to come. But without actually seeing the amendment, it's pretty hard for me to comment on it.
Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will work on that amendment expeditiously.
Further discussion on House File 50. Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, wish to thank Senator Newman for his hard work on this bill. This distractive driving in general is a problem on our highways. I would support what is being done, and I would further ask that we look at the whole issue of distracted driving. It is my understanding that we do not have at the Department of Public Safety or in the driver's manual or the training courses that we presently have a segment specifically devoted to distractive driving. This is a huge problem, but I believe that it's something that should be addressed and that the department should be looking forward to doing that. I had originally intended to offer an amendment, which there may be one still on the horizon, that would add as a penalty to the use of the cell phone illegally under this bill that after the second or third offense, an individual be required to take a certified course in distractive driving. I believe that just the fine is not going to drive the message home. At this point in time, however, I am much more interested in getting a good bill on the books and would encourage further inquiry into the idea of a distractive driving course focused on by the department and prepared and presented for use both in the schools and as a potential penalty for repeated violations of this statute. I would also suggest that at a certain point in time, the message has not gotten through if someone continues to be arrested for violations of this statute, and that consideration be given to a suspension of the driver's license for a period of 30, 60, or 90 days, during which time, if a person needed a temporary license to get to work, they could obtain one. But being deprived of that driving privilege would bring home the message that we have to put the phone down. I admit, I probably would violate this law had it been, would have violated this law had it been in effect. And I think most of the people on this floor and in this audience have done so as well. This bill has, and the things under it, have opened my eyes. I will no longer be doing that. More importantly, we've been focusing on the deaths. Stop and think about the wider suffering, the injuries that are caused by this, the loss of time, the loss of property. This is a huge problem. And unless we address it, it is not going to go away. We have to make the use of a cell phone for these purposes in a car socially unacceptable. And I stand today to plead for that. So I fully support Senator Newman, and I wish a green vote on this bill.
Further discussion on House File 50, Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, I'll pass for right now.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to introduce the A1 amendment.
Senator Limmer has the A1 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Limmer moves to amend House File Number 50 as amended pursuant to Rule 545, page 2, line 26. This is the A1 amendment.
To the A1 amendment, Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just as a little background, the bill that we have before us allows someone to use a cell phone in a phone call in the event that you pull over and legally park your car off the road. It does not say much about the event if you were using a GPS and you were typing in an address into the GPS function. And so, in like manner, the A1 amendment would allow a driver to pull the car off, park legally, and then initiate the typing of that address into the GPS operation. It's very similar and exact as the cell phone use would be. We're just mimicking the same activity, and it does allow the GPS to be used as you're driving, and it integrates in with the existing language in the bill. I'll stand for any questions.
Discussion on the A1 amendment, Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Limmer, I want to clarify, you're saying legally parked, so does that mean that if I'm on 35W, which is a freeway, that I can park on the edge of the freeway, or is that illegal?
Senator Limmer will yield. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hall, I don't believe on 35W or any major freeway you're allowed to pull over and park. That lane is used for high occupancy vehicles, as you know, and it also is for emergency use of that particular shoulder of the road, such as a flat tire or a problem with your car. You don't normally see people parking there to check a map or anything else. It's not used for that purpose. If you are pulled over for that purpose and a trooper sees you, they'll be sure to tell you to move on and get off that freeway.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Senator Limmer, do you know then, are we able to pull over on a highway, county road? Are those parking illegally areas to pull off on the shoulder?
Senator Limmer will yield. Senator Limmer.
Mr. President and Mr. Senator Hall, my knowledge is limited to the U.S. highway system, but I believe, well, I'm not going to say because I don't know. What the real essence and spirit of this amendment is if you're going to use your phone, pull off and park your car and get that particular aspect of the phone operation or the GPS operation done quickly. You don't want to do it while you're in a moving vehicle.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Senator Limmer and Mr. Chair, President. I just wanted to make note that I think that's really important that people know where they can pull off, and I think the shoulder on a highway or county road, you could legally park there temporarily, but I think you're right. On a 35W or something similar, I think you'd have to pull off on the exit ramp and park up there. But I just want to make note of that. I think it's a really good amendment.
Further discussion on the A1 amendment. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, would Senator Limmer yield for a question?
Senator Limmer will yield. Senator Newman.
Senator Limmer, I am in agreement with the concept that would allow folks to pull over, legally park, and program their GPS. And I don't have any problem with that at all. But if you'd look, Senator Limmer, at your bill, or I'm sorry, the A1 amendment, line 1.5, beginning with "that is affixed to the vehicle." Would you be in agreement to deleting that language with an oral amendment? Because by including the affixed to the vehicle language, it would literally, in an awful lot of cases, prohibit you from using your GPS unless it's physically affixed to the vehicle. Senator Limmer, would you agree to that oral amendment?
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I would, Senator Newman.
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, Senator Limmer would yield.
Senator Limmer will yield. Senator Newman.
Senator Limmer, do you wish me to make the oral amendment, or do you want to make the oral amendment to your own amendment?
Senator Limmer, and just a reminder, members, direct your communication through the President. Senator Limmer.
I will affix my eyes on you, Mr. President. Since Senator Newman's concern is the technical writing of the A1 amendment, I'm going to give him the honor to alter that amendment in the spirit that it was considered.
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I would move an oral amendment to the A1 amendment on line 1.5. After the word "insert," delete the quotation marks through "that is affixed to the vehicle," comma.
The Secretary will report the oral amendment to the A1 amendment.
Senator Newman moves to amend the A1 amendment as follows. Page, line 1.5. After the word "insert," continue to include the quotation mark, but delete "that is affixed to the vehicle," comma. Shall I repeat it?
Members, any discussion on the oral amendment to the A1 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the oral amendment to the A1 amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The amendment is adopted. So we're back on the A1 amendment as amended. Senator, any further discussion on the A1 amendment as amended? Senator Newman.
One moment, if I could, Mr. President.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been informed that there's a few slight technical adjustments that need to be made to this amendment, so I'm going to temporarily withdraw the amendment at this time.
Senator Limmer withdraws the A1 amendment. Further discussion on House File 50. Let's see, I have a list here. Senator Senjum is next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I just want to speak briefly to this. Senator Newman, I was one of these people, maybe not so much from the standpoint of freedom, but from the standpoint of why would we ever pass a law where half of Minnesota is going to be violators? What does that accomplish? Well, Senator Newman, and you mentioned this family, and there are families, by the way, perhaps in the gallery and all across Minnesota maybe watching today that have been affected by this. But I want to make reference at least to a couple of individuals, and you spoke to them earlier, Emerson and Rachel Harberts from Dodge Center, Minnesota, who were so tragically killed at a intersection near Claremont, Minnesota, literally driven over by a Hummer while that individual was texting. And Senator Newman, my epiphany moment on all this happened as I stood in front of the two open caskets at the funeral home in Rochester and looking at Mother Rachel and daughter Emerson and laying there in their caskets. Emerson, the daughter, so obviously beaten up. She had a plastic face that they'd arranged for her so she could be showable. Her wig, the golden locks, if you will, the pigtails, such a beautiful young woman in that casket, as well as certainly the mother. I stood before those two caskets that day, Senator Newman, and I said to myself, this has to stop. This has to stop. For me, that was my epiphany moment. I pledged to myself at that moment that unless somebody else did this bill, I was going to come back and do it myself this session because it's just so important. We can learn to be different. I've learned to be different. That's not to say that 2 weeks from now I may be a violator of this. I may get picked up. That's okay. I'll pay my fine. There's consequences. But we've got to educate Minnesota that this is wrong. We've got to get off these cell phones, drive safely. All of those people, all of the people all across the state that have been so tragically affected by this, we think about today as we vote on this. But going forward, we can do better, each of us individually. I will. I think everybody in this membership will. And hopefully with this law, Senator Newman, we'll all be reminded of the tragedies associated with distracted driving due to cell phones, and we'll all clean up our own acts. Thanks so much.
Further discussion on House File 50. Senator Champion, would you still like to speak on the bill? You're next on the list.
Mr. President, I'm still waiting for my amendment, so
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Senator Hayden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President and members, I have an amendment. Well, thank you. It looks like you can hear me now. But the substance of the amendment, which was going to be the A3, really is this issue of a study, and a study that would look at traffic patterns of those who would be stopped by this. Mr. President and members, we have kind of had issues in our state around trafficking or racial profiling. In other words, there has been instances in which communities, especially communities of color, have felt like they have been getting stopped, and there's been data to suggest that disproportionately than other people throughout this state. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. Senator Champion and I arrived here about 11 years ago. There was the primary seatbelt bill, some of you might remember, and there was a long discussion about that, if that would allow law enforcement to stop people. Well, what the bill did, or what the provision did, and we have it, is that it could be the primary reason that you stop someone is because they didn't have their seatbelt on. And we think that that is a good thing. We want everybody to have their seatbelt on, but there were some issues if that could be a reason to stop people just for the sake of stopping them. Mr. President and members, we are a little concerned that this bill, as well intended as it is, and as much and all of the heartfelt comments about families that have been impacted and Minnesotans have been impacted, at the same time we want to balance that with being sure that communities, marginalized communities, communities of color, aren't being stopped inappropriately by this. Mr. President and members, the other body has this in their bill, so we feel comfortable that this is going to be vetted, but we wanted to make sure that on the Senate floor, we at least raise the issue. And Senator Newman, we don't plan to put the members through a vote on this because it isn't intended to be that way. But what it is intended to do is to raise the issue of the unintended consequences that sometimes happens when we do things like this. So we're hoping that Senator Newman, if this bill passes, when we get into conference committee, we could come up with something that's reasonable so that we could take a look back to ensure that when this law goes into effect, if it should pass, that there isn't an unintended consequence, that people of color and others, in particular African American and African American men, aren't being stopped disproportionate to their peers on this issue. I also think, and Senator Champion is going to, I think, come forward with an amendment, but I do think that these issues around accessories and what that looks like often is different depending upon what community that you're in. So I want to make sure that as we're doing this great work here and we're thinking about our constituents, that we're thinking about all our constituents, that as this law, as this bill moves forward, and if it does become law, that we're checking the data closely, we're making sure that we're getting the information out in communities to know what is legal and what isn't legal, because if we don't do that, then there's a good portion of our electorate, a good portion of our society that won't know and understand what this bill is based on our worldview. So, Mr. President, thank you and members for allowing me to kind of speak on this issue. We need to take a really close look and make sure that that the unintended consequences are being fleshed out as we know them. Thanks again, Mr. President.
Further discussion, Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to comment briefly on Senator Hayden's comments, and I want to thank Senator Hayden for bringing those thoughts forward. And I will tell you that the Department of Vehicle Services does intend to have a community statewide awareness program should this bill pass and become law. And most certainly we want to be sensitive to the different cultures that may be affected by this all over the state of Minnesota. And so if there are specific areas or constituents that have to be or should be included in this awareness program put on by the Department of Vehicle Services, most certainly bring that to my attention, and I will do my best to get that information to DVS. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on House File 50, Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have at the dais an A52 amendment.
Senator Champion offers the A52 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Champion moves to amend House File number 50 as amended pursuant to Rule 45, page 2, line 8 after the period insert. This is the A52 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm hoping that Senator Newman will see this as a friendly amendment because it's consistent with what he's articulated so clearly or so eloquently that he wants to have happen here, which is to make sure that individuals are driving hands-free. And I share that. I don't want anyone to, drive in a manner where they're not using both hands on the steering wheel. I think this amendment allows that to happen while keeping in mind that there are a number of different scenarios that can still accomplish it. My amendment simply says that the terms include the use of a scarf or hijab or other items of clothing to hold a device in a hands-free manner obviously would not violate this law or this proposal. I think it's thoughtful. There's so many opportunities now where you can have a scarf that has a pocket in it, and if you're using it that way, it's still in a hands-free manner, and both hands can still remain on the wheel. So I ask the body to support this amendment, as I think is appropriate and is still consistent with the spirit of Senator Newman's proposal before the body today. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
And members, I've been told that the A52 is not online yet, so we will make sure it's online or everyone has a copy before we vote on it. They're working on that. For those of you who do have a copy of the amendment, is there any further discussion? Members, it's a relatively short amendment. The Secretary will read the amendment, and if you would like a paper copy while it's being loaded, let the pages know, and we'll get paper copies to everyone who needs one. But the Secretary will read the amendment.
The champion amendment to House File number 50, line 1.4, page 2, line 8, after the period insert. The term includes the use of a scarf or hijab or other item of clothing to hold a device in a hands-free manner.
All right, and I'm told it is online now, so everyone should have access to the amendment. Further discussion on the A52 amendment, Senator Limmer.
Mr. President, would the author of the amendment yield for a question?
The author will yield. Senator Limmer.
Senator Champion, as I understand the amendment, I haven't seen it in its written form, but if one had, let's say an oversized baseball hat, and you could squirm that phone up underneath the headband of that baseball hat, would that be something that you think would be appropriate to hold that telephone in place along the ear of the driver?
Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Limmer, for the thoughtful question. I would say so. When you look at this particular proposal before the body, what we're asking for is for a law that says to individuals that they should operate in a hands-free mode. Clearly, they've made a very clear distinction of wanting to make sure that both hands are on the steering wheel and that you're able to concentrate and look forward and not be distracted. And I believe your question underscores that, because you can still have your hand, 10 and 2 or 10 and 3, whatever it is now. My sons are taking driver's ed, so they have to tell me a little more. But the bottom line is, members, we want to make sure that individuals are driving hands-free, and we do not want anything that prohibits them from being able to do that. I believe that my proposal before the body is also consistent with law enforcement. They believe that if you're driving in a hands-free manner, it should work. So, Senator Limmer, yes, if they're able to do it without touching the phone or doing some other work on the phone, that would be a problem. But if they're driving in a hands-free mode, it would be appropriate. And I just wanted to make the proposal clear. Thank you, Senator Limmer, for the question.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. The reason I asked the question is that on line 5 of the amendment, it says other item of clothing. And I'm just a little concerned that some very creative driver is going to use some other form of clothing, and it may not be as secure as perhaps a headband or a scarf. The other thing is that I see that we do mention two types of clothing, but the rest of the sentence is rather broad. Senator Champion used the term headband in his description to my answer, and I thought, well, maybe that might be tight enough to hold a cell phone to the side of your head, and I think a hijab would certainly be one because it holds or it usually wraps around the cheekbone, and that would be rather secure, at least the ones that I've seen people using. But other item of clothing, I'm just fearful that may be just a little too general for enforcement. That's the only reason I'm bringing it up.
Senator Champion.
Mr. President, Senator Limber, thank you so much again for your inquiry and your question. But I think the entire vision of this particular bill puts my amendment in context. My understanding is that we want to prohibit individuals from using their cell phone in a manner that would require usage of one hand on the phone and the other on the steering wheel. If that is true, then there are mechanisms that would still allow an individual to drive with both hands on the wheel and still use their cell phone in a way that is not prohibited. And believe it or not, Senator Limmer, there are scarves that I've seen people wear where it goes around their neck and it has a pocket in it. And you can put your phone in that pocket. And if that's true, then that's consistent with the proposal that I'm putting forward, which is to say, hey, I want an individual to drive or operate a motor vehicle in a hands-free manner that doesn't put anyone at risk. No matter how vague the language is, we know that we're creative people. We thrive on innovation here in the great United States. So we should not prohibit anyone from being creative. What we should prohibit them from doing is to drive in a dangerous way. And the proposal that I put on the table, that is the A52 amendment, would merely give a person an opportunity to drive in a hands-free mode.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator JENSEN.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Champion, I guess my question to that is, if they're going to be hands-free in a hijab, when they dial or they place that call versus when they put the phone in the hijab, when does that take place? Because I think the essence and the intent of Senator Newman's bill is to be hands-free, and if you have to mechanically put the phone between your cheek and a hijab, then when does that take place? Does that take place when you're sitting still? Does that take place while you're driving? When does that take place?
Senator Champion will yield. Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to the great senator, thank you also for that thoughtful question. And I think it's really clear. It's just the way a person would use a hands-free device if we were not talking about a scarf or a hijab. Means that you would operate the phone before you start driving. And believe it or not, unfortunately, I talk too much on the phone, but in a hands-free way, where I have extended conversations for long periods of time, so it does not require me or to stop and dial the phone or do anything that would cause a problem. And so a person would simply use the phone in a hands-free mode, so they would have to dial the phone, just like the proposal here, before they're on the road, and do nothing that is inconsistent with the proposal that has been laid out here. I just want it to be clear that it's possible to drive in a hands-free manner that doesn't violate this law, and we want to give people the opportunity to do so. So they would make that call before and wouldn't do anything while they're driving that would be a problem.
Members, next on my list on discussion to the A52 amendment is Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And
You know, I guess sometimes you have to go back into a little bit of history here. We have talked about just about every one of these issues in the past, and one of the things that is important, well, let's say the most important thing, is to get your phone out of your hands. So what Senator Newman has initiated here is a bill that makes sure that your phone is out of your hands. No dialing, no playing, no surfing. And what we have also demonstrated is that there's many ways to use a phone hands-free. I can't use props on the floor of the Senate, but I have props with me that would show how you can use an earbud, how you can use the Bluetooth device that hangs onto your ear, how you can actually talk to your phone, leave it lay on the seat next to you. You can attach it to your dash. There's many ways, and the intent is hands-free. No dialing, no GPS, nothing that requires poking at that screen. So what I've been told is that putting the phone into any kind of article of clothing, including a hijab or a scarf, is actually hands-free. The important thing is, as Senator Bobby Joe Champion said, is you can't dial it. You can't pick it out of that scarf and talk to it. You have to leave it hands-free. And that's the point where you would be violating the law, is when you're not using it hands-free. Now, one of the things that I would be able to do is put it into another article of clothing, because I always make sure I have a top pocket on my shirts. I have pockets all over my suits. I have a pocket that I can put this phone in and attach an earbud to it. I can put the phone into my top pocket in my shirt and talk to it hands-free. So there's a lot of ways we can do it, and I think that right now it may not be as clear as what Senator Champion would like to see it, but law enforcement has said that putting it into a scarf is, in fact, hands-free. So thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm hoping to support Senator Newman in how he comes about with this, but it does go a little bit into Senator Newman's amendment, where you must pull over. You cannot do the addressing, you cannot do the dialing while you're on the road. So I think I'm hoping that Senator Limmer still intends to put his clarifying amendment on just where you should be when you're dialing. So thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion on the amendment. Next on my list is Senator Ralph. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I would oppose the A52 amendment, but I do want to thank Senator Champion for bringing this issue to our attention. I've expressed what I believe the bill currently says, but I don't want to support the amendment as drafted, because we could be talking about a hat or a scarf or a headband or earmuffs, for all that matter. But in reality, the issue is whether or not you are going to be able to operate that cell phone when it is somehow affixed near your ear, and do it in a hands-free manner. And that is the whole intention of the bill. I'm trying to get the phone out of your hands and your eyes back on the road. So for those reasons, I would not support the A52 amendment. However, in order to clear up any ambiguity with respect to the use of a scarf, a hijab, or any other item of clothing, I would offer an oral amendment, Mr. President. On line
Senator Newman, is this an oral amendment to the A52 amendment?
It is, Mr. President.
Okay. Please state your oral amendment.
On line 1.4, after the word term, insert does not.
Senator Newman offers an oral amendment to the A52 amendment. The Secretary. The Secretary will report the oral amendment.
Senator Newman moves to amend the Champion Amendment, the A52 Amendment, line 1.4. After the word insert, it would include the term, but then include the words does not, and I think we drop the S on the word includes. Yes. We add after the word term does not include.
To the oral amendment, any further discussion? Senator Champion.
Mr. President, thank you so much. And Senator Newman, thank you for your thoughts. Even though I believe that your thoughts and the change that you've made to this thoughtful amendment that I put forward as the A52 has been now tampered with in a way that is inconsistent with even your own message. It's interesting to me, members, how a person can say, hey, this is all about being hands-free. And that sounds good, hands-free. But then we interject a thought that will continue to allow it to be hands-free but thoughtful when it comes to all members of our society. Then all of a sudden, we're not going to be as thoughtful as we once were. So with that being said, I am not one who likes the oral amendment, so I'm going to withdraw the A52 amendment.
Senator Champion withdraws the A52 amendment. Members, we're back on House File 50, and next on my list is Senator Tomassoni.
Thank you, Mr. President, and will Senator Newman yield to a few questions?
Senator Newman will yield. Senator Tomassoni.
So, Senator Newman, I just want to clarify a few things that maybe are in the bill, and maybe I'm just not getting a clear message from them. Give me an idea of how this is considered to be distracted driving, and how is it different from the somebody's pet sitting on their lap, or me reaching over to turn my radio on or off, or drinking a cup of coffee, or maybe looking in the back seats to see what the kids are doing. How is this different distracted driving than those things?
Senator Newman. And members, just a reminder, again, please address your comments to the President. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I'm going to answer Senator Tomassoni's question in this way. For over a year, our staff in the Transportation Committee worked on a distracted driving bill. That's what I really did want to come forward with, was a distracted driving bill. And the different possible scenarios under which you could describe distracted driving are so innumerous. It was absolutely impossible, in my estimation, to prepare a definition of distracted driving without it being a legal ambiguity. And that legal ambiguity really does provide a lot of difficulty for law enforcement in trying to enforce what I believe would be a legally ambiguous bill. The difference with this bill, Mr. President, is we are acknowledging the universal abuse of folks when it comes to their hands, or I'm sorry, when it comes to their cell phone. There is nothing that I am aware of that even comes close to the universal abuse of a cell phone in an automobile. Not everybody puts on lipstick, not everybody eats, not everybody reads, and not everybody watches TV. But if you get out on the highway and all you have to do is open up your eyes, you can see innumerable people who've got that cell phone in their hand. And, Mr. President, in my estimation, that's the difference.
Senator Tomassoni.
Mr. President, another question for Senator Newman then to the same point. So while your bill makes it illegal to use your phone while you're driving for anything other than hands-free, can somebody get a ticket for distracted driving because their pet's on their lap, or because they reached over and adjusted the radio, or were drinking coffee and got in an accident? Does that get them a penalty also, or is that not a penalty?
Senator Newman will yield. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, the scenarios just elicited by Senator Tomassoni are not covered under this bill.
Okay.
Senator Tomassoni.
Mr. President, I appreciate that answer. I don't think it answered my question, but I will go on to my next question. So will Senator Newman yield to another question?
Senator Newman will yield. Senator Tomassoni.
Do I have to say that every time I ask a question?
I believe you have to say it every time.
Okay, so Mr. President, Senator Newman, so I have a couple of cars in my family, and I'm not going to tell you who drives which one, but one of them is equipped with hands-free, and the other one is not. So how does the person driving the car that is not equipped with a hands-free operation that's built into the car, how do they go about adhering to this law?
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, go to any electronics store, and for a very small amount of money, I've seen as low as $14, you can buy equipment that will allow you to operate your cell phone in a hands-free manner.
Senator Tomassoni.
So, Mr. Chairman and Mr. President, Senator Newman, so I'm assuming that what you're talking about is buying some kind of a unit that I actually put on my dashboard, and I put my cell phone on so I can actually see the cell phone while I'm driving. And I'm trying to figure out what this one-touch thing is, because I understand on a car that's equipped with hands-free that I can touch the phone button one time and I can say, call Senator Newman. Now, what if, as happens many times with these voice-activated things, Siri says to me, calling Sam Newton. So then I got to cancel and I got to say it again, call Senator Newman, and Siri then goes, I'm calling Sam Newton. Well, at that point, can I just go like this and swipe my phone a couple of times and then press Senator Newman's number and call Senator Newman by doing this, or is that what I just did illegal under this bill?
Senator Tomassoni, what you did might be against the Senate rules for using a prop on the floor, but Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I realize that we are not supposed to use gadgets on the floor, but I just got phoned by Senator Tomassoni. In answer to Senator Tomassoni's question, one touch is not included in House File 50 that is on the Senate floor right now. That's the language that is in the other body. As to specifically what Senator Tomassoni has just asked, and the answer is under House File 50, it would be illegal.
Senator Tomassoni.
So one more question then, Senator Newman. So if what I just
Senator
did
Newman will yield. Senator Tomassoni.
Thank you, Mr. President. So if what I just did was illegal, and I can't get Siri to make the phone call, I'm assuming that my only option then is to either not call you or to pull over and make the call. Is that correct? And since I have one more question, I'll throw that in here at the same time. Are headphones also legal? And my understanding is that if you have one earbud in, it might be okay, but if you have two in, that's actually against the law before you even start talking about this bill. So please enlighten me on both of those questions.
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, Senator Tomassoni is correct on the one earbud or one headphone. If you put a headphone on with two, it is currently illegal in the state of Minnesota. As to his first question, if Senator Tomassoni is unable to reach me using his phone in hands-free manner, the answer is yes. You pull over and call me. And I will tell you that when I'm driving home to Hutchinson, I go through a little town called, just west of here, and I pull over into that little town in their post office parking lot all the time, and either look at or prepare texts and make phone calls. And if you compare, on balance, the reason to pull over, i.e. to not put the traveling public in danger, and put that in balance with how important your phone call is and the inconvenience of it by pulling over. On balance, in my estimation, there's absolutely no comparison. Mr. President, my suggestion to Senator Tomassoni is pull over and make the phone call.
Okay.
Senator
Mr. President,
Tomassoni.
and one last question, maybe, Senator Newman. So let's go back to my previous scenario where I actually called you and I had to swipe my phone 3 times. How does, in the event of an accident where I've made that particular movement on my phone is now on that little device that I bought at at any one of these stores. You can get these devices at to hold my phone, and I am talking hands-free, even though I did something that I shouldn't have been doing because I was swiping too many times. But when the accident occurred, I was actually in a hands-free mode speaking. Does my previous action that I used to dial the phone actually make it illegal under this bill, or is the fact that I got back to hands-free, talking hands-free before I got in the accident, say that I was doing the right thing? Is there a way to explain that one to me?
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I must confess I'm not real sure what the question is. But it sounds to me like Senator Tomassoni has somehow committed an illegal act the first time, the second time, and the third time. What this bill would allow Senator Tomassoni to do would be to activate his phone and then orally ask his phone to make that phone call.
And
Senator Tomassoni.
My point is, Mr. President, is that if I did those things like I said earlier, and I tried to get my phone to talk to me, and to call you, but it won't work, and so I manually do it on my phone. I'm understanding that that was probably illegal based on this bill. However, once I make the phone call and I put the phone down, and now I'm driving my car and I'm driving hands-free, and I get in an accident, did my previous action of dialing the phone without talking to it caused me to be in violation of this bill, or was the fact that I was driving hands-free at the time of the accident something that is actually honoring the letter of the law that we're trying to pass here?
Senator Newman will yield to the question. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, committing the first act is illegal. If you thereafter put the phone down and are now, in fact, hands-free, I suppose that a forensic IT specialist might be able to figure that out. But whether or not law enforcement would be able to make that determination on the road or not, I really can't say. I can say that if you are committing that illegal act to make the phone call in the first place, you are putting folks in danger on the highway while you're trying to make that telephone call. And it's way easier, Mr. President, to simply take the time and the inconvenience to pull over and make the phone call and then be on your way.
Thank you for your patience, Senator Newman. I don't have any more questions, but I understand the importance of the bill. I am very conflicted as to what I want to do here. I'm very concerned about racial profiling. I'm very concerned about abuse of police authority as a result of this. It appears to me that this is maybe the right thing to do, but at the same time I have very, very serious concerns about doing it, and I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do on my vote.
Further discussion on House File 50. Next on my list is Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First thing I would like to say is to Senator Carlson, I think I'd been here all of 2 weeks a couple of years ago, and you started in on me. And you were absolutely right. We needed to do something. And so this bill certainly has my support. But I will forever hold Senator Carlson's persistence as a model of how to get things done. I understand that it's incremental, and Senator Newman has worked immensely hard on it. So without a great deal of hesitation, I support this bill.
Further discussion on House File 50. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to offer the A5 amendment.
Senator Matthews offers the A5 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Matthews moves to amend House File number 50 as amended pursuant to Rule 45. Page 3 after line 1, insert. This is the A5 amendment.
To the A5 amendment, Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the discussion that we've had today. I know that I still have some strong questions about how this would be implemented and what this would look like. But if we're going to move in this direction, which I believe we ultimately are at the end of the day, I think it would be wise for us to take measured, careful, small steps to see if a small step is sufficient to curb the problem of this distracted driving on the road and not take a large hammer to something that may only require a small tap in the right direction. And so I offer the A5 to add to this bill to make sure that a conviction or this violation doesn't immediately go onto a record, which would have long-term cost ramifications as drivers need to learn to adjust to their way of driving, to put the phone down, and I'd like to offer this as an amendment to the bill.
Further discussion to the A5 amendment? Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. President. To the A5 amendment as written, I would not support it. I think that under the current law, if there's a texting violation, it is in fact reported on your driving record. Number two, in my estimation, this is really an important issue. And if you are so foolish as to text and drive or make phone calls and drive or use Snapchat and drive or take selfies and drive, all of those matters are extremely dangerous. And candidly, if you wind up with a violation because you refuse to put your phone down and it gets reported to your driving record, and as a result goes to your insurance company, then there's a certain amount of personal responsibility that at some point kicks in, and I think you're personally responsible for your own conduct. And if you refuse to put your phone down and you get a ticket for this, well, in my world, I guess you've just got it coming because you have refused to obey the law.
Further discussion, Senator Matthews.
Mr. President, I'd like to offer a small oral amendment to the A5.
Senator Matthews, please state your oral amendment.
On line 1.6, before the word violation, insert first. And Mr. President, I believe that we need to try to make sure that we have small incremental steps to make sure as students, as young people are beginning to drive, have an opportunity to learn this without significant and serious ramifications down the road. So I don't know, Mr. President, if I can just incorporate that or if I need to have a vote on my own oral amendment, but I'd like to offer that oral amendment.
The Secretary will report the oral amendment to the A5 amendment.
Matthews moves to amend the A5 amendment as follows. Line 1.6, after the word A, insert the word first.
Discussion on the oral amendment to the A5 amendment. On the oral amendment, Senator Carlson? Okay, let's take a vote on the Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Matthews stand for a question?
Senator Matthews will yield. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess my question would be is, if it doesn't go on your record, how will the officer know that it's your first violation?
Senator Matthews. Senator Westrom to the question.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Westrom.
or Mr. President, wondering if I could offer Senator Howe some explanation. I think I might have some insight or thought on the answer.
Senator Westrom, please proceed.
Mr. President, Senator Howe, my reading of this language wouldn't be that it's not on your record at the DPS, it's just it wouldn't be reported to the insurance company. So you would have it on your record, and if there was a second one subsequently down the road, that would be on your record as well. It's just the first one under this language then wouldn't be reported, so you'd have more of a grace period to not have insurance companies affect your insurance rates, like we have other laws that some violations or early violations aren't reported or counted against citizens' record on their insurance rate.
Further discussion on the oral amendment to the A5 amendment. Senator Matthews.
Mr. President and Senator Howe, thank you for the good question, and I am trying to get at what Senator Westrom just spoke at as to how it would impact insurance, the rates that you'd end up paying. So I may see if we need to still add some language to it, but that is the whole goal, and that's the intent of this.
Further discussion, Senator Ralph? No? Any further discussion on the oral amendment to the A5 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the oral amendment is adopted. Now we're back on the A5 amendment as amended with the oral amendment. Further discussion, Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, members, I would rise in support of the Matthews amendment, even as amended. Members, as we take this step, and we've had lots of good discussion here so far today, certainly there are very touching and tragic stories out there. There is an entire state of Minnesota that's going to be affected with this. And members, as a law like this gets brought forward and whatever the final law becomes, let's at least not make it a financial hit to every driver across the state of Minnesota that might first get a ticket for distracted driving for holding their cell phone, which is a very common habit. And in many cases, it's a very reasonable option, much more reasonable than putting on makeup or eating a Big Mac. And we don't allow that under this bill, but at least let's not give a financial hit to those in the driving public that are doing their best to try to adapt to this, and they certainly will as they get their first ticket and start changing their habits. But let's not have it reported to the insurance the first time.
To the amendment, Senator Carlson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I stand with Senator Newman in opposition of this amendment. I think that we've talked about the penalties a lot in this particular initiative, and I think we've had other bills that have had penalties that are far greater than this one does, even up to the point of perhaps being involved in a crash, and it could be a felony. Now, those bills are not on the floor here, but it does serve to demonstrate the seriousness of this particular behavior. And even the very first time is very important. I was involved in the increase in penalty for texting a few years ago, and thanks to Senator Limmer, he actually increased the penalty from what I was proposing. So these are very serious behaviors, and I think that if I can guess right, I think we're going to have a lot of publicity on this particular bill being initiated. I know that they are already covering it in the driver's training courses, and in fact, as some of us know that are above 55, we have the 55 Alive classes that we take. In my latest one, they spent an hour on distracted driving and significant time on using a cell phone causing distractions. So I think this is an important issue. Even at the very first time, we need to be sure that people are appropriately charged if they're doing something. And of course, I think we all know that it's going to be an indicator. For instance, straying out of your lane, it's going to be something else that will probably cause a stop and probably cause a charge of using your cell phone while driving. So I would oppose the amendment, and I join with Senator Newman in opposing the amendment.
Further discussion on the A5 amendment, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, Senator Carlson is correct. I do oppose the A5 amendment as amended. I'll give you a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm not at all sure that this amendment says exactly what the author of the amendment is intending to do, and that is to get to the question of insurance. I will not repeat my earlier comments regarding personal responsibility, but I do think that we have a responsibility when it comes to violating our laws, and if you violate a law, you're going to have to suffer the consequences. Finally, I would say this. The author of the amendment has indicated that we should be taking small, inconsequential steps in order to move forward with educating the public. This is not a small, inconsequential matter. There are people that are being hurt badly on the highways. There are people that are dying on the highways because of this abuse of the use of cell phones. I don't want to take small steps. I want the police to be able to pull you over and give you a ticket if you violate this law. I want it to be clear. I don't want it to be a secondary offense. We have to do something about what is happening on our highways. And the people that we are sharing the highways with, we are putting in danger because we refuse to put our phones down. And that, in my estimation, Mr. President, is wrong.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Dames.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and I too would arise in opposition to this amendment. I think that if we're going to have a situation where we're going to issue tickets, then I think those are the penalties, and that might be one way, again, to try to curb the issue.
Senator Carlson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I neglected to mention one item when I was speaking last time I stood. We've talked about this, the seriousness of distracted driving, of using a cell phone causing this distraction, and we've compared it to driving while intoxicated. So leaving this, taking this off of the driver's record is actually comparable to leaving off a DUI, and I would certainly not support that.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Thomasoni.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think, Mr. President, that what I'm hearing here is that people are confused about whether or not a policeman will know if it's your first violation or your second violation. And I don't think it's necessary for the police officer to know that. I think this is all about the person's driving record and what they did. So to make this a little softer, I think maybe what we could do, Mr. President, and I think this is a friendly amendment to the author, is put the Department of Public Safety must not include a conviction for a violation that did not, and this would be the insertion, that did not result in an accident of this section on the person's driving record. And if somebody can give me better language than that, but the intent is to say that if the first violation was a result of just being pulled over because you're talking on your phone, but you did not get in an accident.
Senator Tomassoni, do you prefer to offer that as an oral amendment, or would you like to?
I would like to offer.
Would you like to work to get a?
I would like to offer that as an oral amendment, Mr. President. Does it not read right?
So can you, Senator Tomassoni, can you please state it again, and then we'll have the Secretary report the oral amendment.
Okay. After the word violation, insert did not result in an accident.
The Secretary will report the Tomassoni oral amendment to the A5 amendment.
Tomassoni moves to amend the A5 amendment as follows, line 1.6. After the first word A, it would strike the word first.
No.
After violation, then add the words which did not result in an accident.
Senator Tomassoni, is that how you intended, or do you wish to keep the word first?
I think the word first has to stay in there.
Okay, Senator Tomassoni, can you?
I think we have the answer.
Okay, the Secretary will report the oral amendment.
We'll leave it as is with a first violation of this section of a person's driving record, which did not result in an accident. Put it at the end of the sentence.
That's better, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
After the word record, insert the words which did not result in an accident.
Okay. And Mr.
The oral amendment, Senator Tomassoni.
Mr. President and members, I think this makes this very clear, and it also says, look at getting in an accident while driving, while being on your phone and violating this law is way more serious than getting stopped by a policeman while you're driving. Now, obviously, the second thing could happen. You could get in an accident because you're talking on the phone. But the spirit of this particular amendment says, look, we're not going to put it on your record as long as you didn't get in an accident. But if you get in an accident, the first violation will go on your record. And I think it's one of these kind of things. It's kind of like getting stopped for speeding and getting a warning. You slow down, and I think this makes some sense. So it also makes this more acceptable to, I would hope, everybody, because at some point in time, what we're trying to do is stop accidents here.
To the oral amendment, Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate Senator Tomassoni's oral amendment, and I agree with the reasons he stated with it, and I would take it as a friendly amendment.
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I would oppose the Tomassoni oral amendment. House File 50 isn't about cases where an accident has occurred. House File 50 is a bill that is trying to convince people to put their phone down in the first place so that they don't have that accident that Senator Tomassoni is referring to. So for those reasons, I would not support the oral amendment.
Further discussion, Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would join Senator Newman in opposing the amendment even after the amendment has been amended. The problem, of course, is that what was said in the amendment is that you have to prove that and let me restate, go back to the dictionary for a bit. There are no such things as traffic accidents. They're crashes. If you watch any report of traffic crashes these days, they don't use the term accidents. And that's what we're talking about here, is using your cell phone And getting involved in a crash is no accident. So what we need to do is we need to be sure that people are putting down those phones, not using them at all. And I think, as I have, you'll find that it's really easy to do once you realize that these are crashes that can be caused by being distracted by using a cell phone. So thank you, Mr. President.
Members were on the Tomassoni oral amendment to the A5 amendment. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the oral amendment to the A5 amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted.
Division. Division.
Division. Members, all those that are in favor of the oral amendment to the amendment, please stand.
Jim, what does it do?
Okay, members who are opposed to the oral amendment to the A5 amendment, please stand. There being 26 members in favor and 32 opposed, the President stands corrected. The amendment is not adopted. So members, we're back to the A5 amendment.
Mr. President.
Senator Matthews.
Mr. President, I'll withdraw the A5 amendment.
Senator Matthews withdraws the A5 amendment. Members, we're back on House File 50, and I'm going back to the list that I have, and Senator JENSEN.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I stand in favor of House File 50. As a freshman senator 2 years ago, I had mixed feelings about this bill. I did struggle with many of your concerns, as we've had before, about the personal freedoms and things like that. Although I spent 2 years in the Transportation Committee, listening to testimony, listening to all kinds of things that happen in traffic safety. I, as well as Senator Senjum, attended the Harbert's funeral in Rochester. I was not there to see what Senator Senjum did on the night before at the wake, but I was there the day of the funeral. And I have never seen something so sad in my life to have that happen, and the pain that it caused that family. I've talked with people in my community, in my district, and they're pretty much about the same as everybody here. Is there kind of a split decision whether they should vote for it or not? But I think some important things that we do need to do here today is we need to change the habits of what we do in our car and our cell phone. I'll be honest, my two children, Sam and JC, are the two best when I ride with them. They are the ones telling me, Dad, put down your phone. I need that. They are the ones telling me, Dad, put down your phone, change your behavior. So it's good. At least we're getting out to our young adults across the state of Minnesota and teaching them what the right thing to do is and what the right thing is not to do. I, again, have probably been a violator of this if it were in law when I was first came in the Senate. But I think, again, the most important thing we can do is we need to change our habits. The stories, the deaths, to listen to that in transportation, you need to hear that. The pain that it causes these families way outweighs the pain it has to us to pull aside, make a call at a different time, and look at our priorities, what we should be doing in our car. We need to focus on what's in front of us, focus on the attention of driving a car. That is the primary reason you're behind a wheel, is to get somewhere. We need to change our behavior. I stand in support of House File 50.
Further discussion on House File 50, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think this is a good bill. I think it's an important public safety bill. And I think the stories, the tragic stories we've seen, I think give us plenty of evidence of why that's the case. And so I want to first thank Senator Newman for carrying the bill and his hard work on it. But I wanted to step aside and say I don't think we'd be here today if it hadn't been for Senator Carlson over the last year or two and his consistent work pushing this bill, asking for a hearing, demanding a hearing, trying to educate us, trying to work with the public on it. And so no slighting of any of the work that's being done this year, but I want to say I think if it hadn't been for Senator Carlson's work, I don't think we'd be here, and I think that's going to make a huge change in the public, so I just wanted to call that out. And I know Senator JENSEN had made that point as well, but I think it's worth seconding.
Further discussion on House File 50, Senator Champion.
Mr. President, thank you. I thought you said Chamberlain. I was getting ready to look back at my good friend Chamberlain. Sorry about that, Mr. President. Mr. President, earlier I withdrew the A52 amendment. I'd like to offer that again, the A52 amendment.
Senator Champion offers the A52 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Champion moves to amend House File number 50 as amended pursuant to Rule 45, page 2, line 8, after the period insert. This is the A52 amendment.
To the A52 amendment, Senator Champion.
Mr. President, I have a quick question. I know when I offered the amendment before that Senator Newman had made an oral amendment to this amendment, and I want to know if we need to go there or if I can go straight to my bill unless he wishes to offer his oral amendment again.
So
that's a question
right now
procedurally.
We have the A52 amendment in front of us. It's back to its original form. Is there any further discussion on the A52 amendment? Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, members, in the spirit of the bill of hands-free, it seems like this is an amendment that follows that intent and the spirit, and I would urge members to support it.
Further discussion on the A52 amendment? Senator Newman? Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would offer an amendment to the amendment, the A55 amendment.
Senator Jasinski offers an amendment to the amendment with the A55 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment to the amendment.
Senator Jasinski moves to amend the Champion amendment to House File number 50 as follows. Page 1, delete. This is the A55 amendment.
To the A55 amendment, Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. What this does is refer to an electronic or a mechanical hands-free method, not a clothing piece.
Further discussion to the A55 amendment to the A52 amendment. Senator Champion.
Mr. President, I would ask the body not to accept this amendment and that we would vote it down and get to the underlying amendment, which allows individuals to use other items in a hand-free way. Thank you.
Further discussion to the amendment. Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would stand in support of Senator Jasinski's amendment to the amendment.
Further discussion. Senator Abler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I never thought I'd be up on this bill. This bill is a really good idea. I have warmed up greatly, and I appreciate Senator Newman's efforts to keep it focused and keep the penalties low while trying to change cultural behavior. I believe that the amendment, I'm speaking against the A, whatever number it was, 55. I believe that the Senator Champion's amendment is sufficient. If you've spent any time with these individuals, they literally spend hours with their phone talking to people, and I had a chance to meet a good number, and that phone wasn't going anywhere. And so I don't think this amendment is necessary, and I think it actually moves us away from the cultural change we would have, which is to get people to take the phone out of their hands and talk with just hands-free. So I would urge people to vote no on the A55. I don't think it's necessary. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor of the A55 amendment to the A52 amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. We are back on the A52 amendment. Senator Senjum.
Mr. Chair and members, I would just contend that, you know, it's really not about where you carry your phone, if it's in your pocket or under a scarf or whatever. It's what you do when you manipulate it. And I'm just going to contend that whether it's in my pocket or under a scarf or anywhere else, that's fine. But I've got to actually distract myself to functionally use that phone. And so I'm speaking in favor of, you know, the devices that we have. I happen to have a little magnet that I attach it to, and I can press the whatever it is, the home button, and talk to Siri and get it all activated that way. But under a scarf or in a pocket, you've got to manipulate, and that's where the crashes occur. That's what's dangerous. So I would oppose this amendment.
Further discussion on the A52 amendment. Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Champion take a question?
Senator Champion will yield. Senator Hall.
Mr. President, Senator Champion, my question is then, if I have this right, someone that has a headscarf would put the phone in there ahead of time, would not be touching the phone at all while they're driving, because if they touch the phone in any way while it's on their head, it would be then against the law. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hall, for that question. What I'm saying is, in the spirit of this bill, that anyone who uses a scarf or other clothing, it would have to be in a hands-free way. The whole idea is that we do not want individuals using their hands in any shape, form, or fashion. And my amendment allows that to be so, is that they could put it around the neck or they could put it in their pocket, but just as long as both hands are on the steering wheel and they have the ability to concentrate on the road and do all the things that's necessary. So I don't want us to get hung up on the mechanism itself as opposed to the spirit of the bill, which is to make sure that people are operating in a hands-free mode.
Senator Hall.
Mr. President and Senator Champion, I would support that because I think that is the spirit of it. But I'll tell you, if someone reaches up because it falls out or it falls on the floor and they've got to try to pick it up, I think they have the penalty right there, because now they've touched that phone or they were distracted by it. So, yeah, I'm in support of it. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Senator Champion.
Just briefly, I would request a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. A roll call will be granted. Any further discussion on the A52 amendment? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll on the amendment. All senators having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 37 ayes and 27 nays, the amendment is adopted. Further discussion on House File 50. Senator Westrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, with the vote of the last amendment, I would offer the A57 amendment and urge you to support it like you supported the Champion amendment.
Senator Westrom offers the A57 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Westrom moves to amend House File number 50 as amended pursuant to Rule 45, page 2, line 21, after 300 insert. This is the A57 amendment.
To the A57 amendment, Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, members, what the A57 amendment would do would substantially enhance the training opportunities for young drivers that are just beginning in driver's education courses by directing that distracted driving needs to be the focus that so many have talked about here today, and it should be part of the curriculum. Surprisingly, it's not in this bill, and so this amendment would really help that and then bring it forward so as time moves on, the curriculum has not. It doesn't talk about the distractions of cell phone use and proper and improper use, and we want that to be part of the curriculum. Our young drivers or any new drivers taking the driver's ed training learn about. It's that important, and so it should be part of this bill, assuming this bill passes. So we direct that training to be incorporated into future driver's ed training, and it also gives anybody that would be violating the distracted driving law by having a cell phone in their hand a couple chances to really enhance their insight and education on distracted driving. And what it would do is it would offer them, if they've received a ticket, a 50% reduction in their fine the first and second time if they want to complete a distracted driving course that they pay for. Members, this is done in other areas, and I know in other states because I've had constituents talk to me about it on certain penalties or fines. I know child safety tickets are handled this way. Sometimes they give people a reduction. We have other tickets across the state. I know there was about 10 years ago a big controversy over local jurisdictions giving violators of speeding laws or other traffic violations, a reduction if they take a course in driving, depending upon what it was related to in their ticket or violation. This is the same spirit of that. So the first fine would be from $50 to $25. The second, instead of being $300, would be $150 if they so choose to take a distracted driving course that they would have to pay for after it would be approved by the Commissioner of Public Safety. The third time, they'd be not offered that option or training as part of a ticket. By the third time, they probably haven't learned enough from the first courses, or they wouldn't be learning anymore, and so it would stay the same. So the only change would be on the first and second violations, that they would have a reduction if they so chose, but also voluntarily participated in a distracted driving course. Members, I think that accomplishes what many have talked about here. Get the education out there for the driving public, but let's make it reasonable and let's make that option available. This bill doesn't have distracted courses otherwise in it that are going to be developed. It doesn't add more distracted driving to our education system as new drivers start learning about how to drive. And so that makes a lot of sense to add that in. If we're serious about stopping distracted driving, let's stop it on the front end with new drivers and start training them with it. And that's what this amendment does.
Thank you, Senator Westrom. Questions on the A57 amendment? Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I would stand in opposition to the A57 amendment for the following reasons. You will note, Mr. President, on line 2.14, what is anticipated is the course being offered by a private vendor, which is approved by the Commissioner. I would remind you, Mr. President, that the driving course that is anticipated in the A57 amendment does not exist, either for the distracted driving course or under line 1.29 for the driver education program. The rough estimate that I have been given as to the cost of the distracted driving course on page 2 is $2.2 or $2.3 million. I have no idea what the cost of this private vendor would be. I have no idea what the cost of the driver education program would be. But without question, there would be a significant fiscal note on what is being proposed in the A57 amendment. Now, having said that, I agree that education would be a very, very important component of what we are talking about today. But to bring forward an amendment with an unknown significant fiscal note is not, in my opinion, the way to go on the Senate floor. I have invited several members to bring a separate bill forward. Let's have a hearing on it. Let's do a fiscal note on it so that Senator Rosen knows what she is facing in the Finance Committee. But to do it on the fly, on the floor, is not going to work because you simply don't know how much this is going to cost. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further questions on the A57 amendment? Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Westrom, just to add to what Senator Newman just said, I did have a fiscal note regarding this, and I can share it with you at a later date. I think Department of Public Safety was indicating something in the range of 13 FTEs would be involved in this. I have committed to working with DPS during interim because this is a component that was in my distracted driving bill that is currently on general orders, that I will be working with DPS to put together language during interim where we can bring this back. But if we did this, Senator Westrom, this would be a very expensive addition. As Senator Newman said, I am totally supportive of this, and it was added in the judiciary when the bill was going through its committees. Right now is not the time or the place for it, but I commit to you, Senator Westrom, that we will work on this and have this in the next session and find a way to fund that effort, because it is definitely something that's worth it. Thank you.
Other questions on the A57? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I am a strong supporter of eliminating distracted driving, and let me just add that we know that the 100 deadliest days are just around the corner. That's from Memorial Day until Labor Day. Teen crashes spike during those days. And 60% of those teen crashes are caused by distracted driving. But I don't believe that this bill today, or this amendment today, has gone through all of the vetting process. I'm concerned that some teens would have access to a particular distracted driving course, and in other parts of the state they would not, and yet they would be then facing disparate fines based upon where they lived. I just don't believe that this is the time for this piece. I think it's something that should be looked at, and I'd encourage we pass the hands-free driving bill today, this year, and then come back and amend it, as we always do, after much discussion with further elaborating on distracted driving. So I will be voting against the Westrom amendment.
Further discussions on the A57. Senator Westrom.
Well, Mr. President, a lot of discussion about bills, but not the amendment in front of us, and so I'll bring it back to the amendment. Senator Newman, I appreciate your concern, and that was the concern. We had some discussions by email and et cetera over the last few days, and that you raised a good concern. That language is not in this amendment, because that's why we've changed it. So the parties that would be taking the course would be paying the fee, and it would be a private vendor that would develop it. It wouldn't go into effect, this option wouldn't go into effect until that course had been developed. The language you're talking about, Senator Newman, and to clarify for the members here, the 2 million plus that you're talking about, and Senator Osmick, this goes to your language too. We're not talking about DPS setting up the course and hiring 13 or 20 extra FTEs, which is part of the fiscal note you're referring to. We're not hiring that fiscal staff under this amendment. We changed it, Senator Newman, so we didn't have that fiscal cost on the state. And if the parties, and if this option is going to be available to have more people learn a distracted driving course, there's many in the private sector that could develop this. They would charge a fee like other examples that I've talked about. There's child safety, and I know a constituent that got a ticket out of state and had this option in Hawaii, but it didn't make sense to go back to Hawaii to take the course. But Senator Newman, that's the difference between what you talked about and what this language is. It doesn't have the FTEs hired. It's the private sector and the public that's got the tickets that would have this option to take the course and learn more about distracted driving. And if they do that, then their fine would be in half of what your bill is proposing. Otherwise, they'd pay the fine under your bill. So, Senator Osmick, I hope that answers your question as well. This isn't the same language that you're talking about with 13 or 20 more FTEs, because the department isn't the one hiring and having to run these courses. Members, on the issue about students across the state having it, I've talked and worked with our Senate counsel and fiscal staff, and this is already things we fund for them to change their curriculum already in the current budgets according to our staff. So if our staff got it wrong, then we'll have to fix that. But we don't need to pay them twice for doing something that they already do, which is oversee the curriculum, change it as times change. And we're just directing them. We've talked a lot about getting this education out there, Well, talk is cheap. Let's put it on the bill that's moving through the Senate, moving through the legislature, and get it done. Let's not just talk about training our youth to be more aware of electronic device use and proper and improper use when they're learning about their education of driving and getting their new driver's license. Let's put it in the curriculum. Let's not just talk about it. We already have a department funded to do this. So support the amendment if we want them to be using that funding for this type of priority, which I think many people have talked about. And so I urge your support of this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for Senator Newman, who might help clarify this if he would yield.
Senator Newman will yield. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Newman. With all the discussion about the importance of education and public awareness, I'm wondering if you could speak to the part of your bill. I understand that there will be a large public awareness campaign from the date of enactment from the date of passage to enactment. Certainly, I think that will be incredibly helpful, but I'm wondering if it might address some of Senator Westrum's concerns as well. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that part of your bill. I believe there's a robust public awareness campaign, and I'd like to hear more about that.
Senator Newman.
Mr. President, Senator Nelson is correct, and a review of the fiscal note in this matter will reveal that DVS does intend to have a robust public education and awareness program after the bill is signed into law and before enactment in August. And so Senator Nelson is correct. That is anticipated, and I expect, as she has indicated, it will be a really robust public awareness program.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to speak on actually the cost of the bill. And Senator Westrum, this is a wonderful initiative, but there still will be a cost for oversight from the department, and there will still be a fiscal note. So I look forward to the chance of having this discussion ongoing in Finance Committee, where it is a proper place to have this discussion.
Further discussion on the A57. Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to join with Senator Newman in opposing this amendment. We've been working on this for quite some time, and we've talked about how more education will help. And I agree with all of those that want to add more education and perhaps even tie it into the violation. And in fact, Senate File 1315 is something that I have sponsored, and this is to help develop that particular curriculum for either using it as an enhancement to penalties or using it for young people before they get their permits. So we're working on it, but I think that this is we're not right there yet. This is not the time for this, and I want to see us get this bill through, and we'll learn a lot more in the next year as we get some more familiarity with it. So I would stand in opposition to the Westrum amendment.
Senator Westrum.
Mr. President, I ask for a roll call.
Roll call requested. Roll call granted. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also rise in opposition to the amendment, basically on the premise of the language stating that requiring an hour of teaching about distracted driving. My understanding that these courses are not very long, and an hour of the course is probably all they have. I'm not sure where that language came from, Senator Westrum, Mr. Chair and Senator Westrum, but I do believe that that would be excessive, and I do want to have flexibility. I think language education is necessary, and I support what Senator Carlson mentioned, but I worked on a similar issue trying to get some more language on on the courses for driving courses, and I believe an hour just seems excessive, and I don't believe that that would be that would be probably a lot of time just devoted to one subject, and there's a lot of subject matters that are being taught when you're taking these courses on the private sector. So just giving food for thought to reassess where that hour came from, and at this point in time, I agree with Senator Carlson that we should put this forward without this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Franzen. Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm really troubled here because I do believe that we need this distracted driving education. But I'm also concerned that we have a bill that I do not want to have to take the chance that it gets derailed. And from what I am hearing, there is that possibility. Unfortunately, I will have to vote against this amendment, even though it pains me greatly to do so, because I think it does get at the root cause of the problem we're trying to solve, and that is distractions while you're in a vehicle. And so, as I stated, I will be voting against it, but reluctantly. Thank you.
Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. President. As one who has carried bills in the past regarding driver's education and who is very committed to making sure that our learning drivers get the best possible information, I share the spirit of this amendment. I am the parent of a recent graduate of the driver's education system, and I know this was something that was talked about in his particular classes, and it is something that should be available to all students. But I also have the concern that knowing and having worked on these issues with driver's ed and these processes, this is a little more complicated than I think we should be addressing in a floor amendment. I think we should be able to go back and visit this and look at it and make sure we're doing something that really makes sense and is workable and that will satisfy the very important idea behind this amendment. But at this time, I think we need to move forward with the underlying bill. And I also am not able to support the amendment at this time, but look forward to moving forward with the idea in the future.
Any further discussion on the A57? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll on the A57 amendment. The Secretary will close the roll. With all those senators wishing to vote who voted, the amendment fails 49 to 17. Further discussion on the bill. Further discussion on the bill. Senator Bach. Senator Bach, I had you on the list.
Well, Mr. President, I just wanted to rise to thank Senator Carlson. I remember it was a number of years ago. In fact, he had lost an election and came back since he was first an author on this bill. And I think it was back in 2008 or 2009, Senator Carlson raised this issue in our caucus and was one of the authors of a bill. So I wanted to thank him for his persistence. Senator Carlson, it only took 10 years. So here we are today. So congratulations, Senator Carlson, for all your work on this over the years.
Further discussion on the bill, Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to everyone here who has worked so hard. Thank you especially to Senator Newman for all of the work he has done, the excellent presentation he's made, and for being so cooperative on everything that we've worked on together here. I also want to go back, and I'm one of these people that likes history. So I want to go back to 2009 when I first signed on to this bill and remind Senator Ruud and Senator Benson that you were on it when you were in the House. Isn't that curious? And then in 2011, Senator Uyghur carried it, but it didn't have a House companion. Later, we had Senator Newton on it in 2016 or 2014 when he was in the House. So we've had a lot of people that have worked on it. Senator JENSEN actually worked with me 2 years ago to try to get it through, and just didn't quite make it. Senator Housley was a co-sponsor. Senator Ingebrigtsen was a co-sponsor. But you know what? It was the families that have worked so hard, the families that have put such a big effort into this. I've gotten to know a lot of them, and I'll tell you, it pains me to see them have to come over and over and over to committees and present what probably is the worst experience of their lives. They've had to show the pictures of their loved ones, a grandfather, a brother, a daughter, sons, mothers, and husbands. So we're at the point here where we can do something about this. 17 other states have already done something similar, and we want to make sure that this is the day that we take care of it, and we thank these families for continuing to push this issue. And members, I'm encouraging you to reward them with a green vote. Thank you.
Any further discussion on House File 50? Seeing none, the Secretary will give House File 50 its third reading.
House File number 50, a bill for an act relating to transportation.
Third reading. Final discussion on the bill. Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, members, it's certainly been a great debate. One major concern in this bill, well, a few, but I think it's a laudable effort to reject education for our youth and those going through driver's ed, to focus on more distracted driving. Tells me we have a big area to still work on. It's been talked about for years, and it's ironic that we haven't done that 10 years ago, because that wouldn't have had any debate over personal liberties, freedoms, difference between rural and metro. But members, there is a small business owner that I've had this discussion with multiple times, and others, farmers. In the area I represent has a lot of rural roads, and a lot of roads that have very few people on them. Counties that don't even have stoplights. And the one small businessman that I'm thinking of that rings over and over in my mind when he said, the hour in the morning I'm driving to my job, he's a carpenter, runs his own business. I sure hope you're not going to take my office an opportunity to talk to customers, make some sales, or do things that I can't do when I'm swinging the hammer. And knowing that person, they're very reasonable. And when they're in lots of traffic, I would trust they aren't misusing their cell phone, whether it's in their hands or they've got a hands-free device in their ear and they have to push a button or two to answer or make a call out. But it's persons like that that are going to be affected the most. Highway 75 on the other edge of the state is largely in my district. There's many times that highway has very few people on it. There's times we've driven it, and it will intentionally count how many cars you can find in the next 10 or 20 miles. And members, you can count them on one hand in many instances. That is not as unreasonable as eating a Big Mac, putting your makeup on, driving here in the metro. And yet for that small business person now, it's going to be illegal for them to use their cell phone if they at all have it in their hand. And that's the compromise, that's the middle ground that doesn't quite seem to be struck well enough. Or that person that's at the stop sign and maybe going to put the GPS address in, if they don't pull over to a parking spot legally, yet at 8 p.m. on County Road 10 and crossing of Highway 79 in Grant County, for example, you could sit at that stop sign for many minutes, and I dare say probably half hour to an hour at times, if not longer, at certain times of the day, and there wouldn't be anybody coming. But that person at that stop sign, not moving, will be in violation of putting in their GPS address if they're at the stop sign with no traffic around. Or if they're talking on their cell phone or dialing a number before they start proceeding, even though they're not in motion, they're still going to be in violation under this bill. And so it's that part that really gives me concern, that there's no balance or reasonableness or difference between rural areas and heavily populated areas with lots of traffic. So members, it's for that reason, and not educating our youth with the driver's education course, which is where we should begin with all of the distracted driving, to start changing those habits from young and on. But that's not in this bill either. So members, I think we should hold it over and try to find a better balance on those issues. And I stand, and that's the reason I can't vote yes on this distracted driving bill. It's going to remove cell phones from your hands and make a lot of small businesses that I talked about. The person I'm referring to in my district, Stevens County, Minnesota, concerned about being able to run his small business when he drives to and from his job site, because that's his office time. That's how he makes sales for his next customers to come in. And he's very concerned about it. Thank you.
Final discussion on House File 50 as amended. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of House File 50. For example, the latest data I have is for 2015. 1/4 of the crashes in Minnesota were a result of cell phone use or happened during cell phone use by the driver. Nationally, that is 1.6 million cell phone use related crashes per year. 1.6 million nationally. And here in Minnesota, 1/4 of the crashes are related to cell phone use by the driver. Now, I understand that this bill it's not the be-all and the end-all. Legislation rarely is. You still might have people eating Big Macs while they're driving. We still may have people putting on lipstick at a stop sign. But let me tell you, to vote against this bill because it is not big enough, I believe, is the wrong direction. Let us at least do what we know can save lives. Let us at least pass this bill, House File 50, which will make it illegal to use your hand on your phone while you are driving. So I stand in strong support of House File 50. It will save lives. I'm particularly concerned about our youngest drivers, our most inexperienced drivers. They, more than any, have cell phone use related crashes. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm very concerned about the 100 deadliest days which are just around the corner. Memorial Day to Labor Day. Traffic fatalities increase by double digits during those days. I had thought about an amendment to this bill that would make it effective the day after passage. But as I found out, there were some bugs along the way to allowing that to happen. But there is going to be a broad, robust public awareness campaign about cell phone use dangers while driving. I think this will also help bring home the message about distracted driving in general. So members, do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I suggest a strong, robust green vote on House File 50.
Final discussion to the bill. Senator Newman.
Mr. President, we've had a wonderful debate, a lot of amendments offered. When we began a few hours ago, I asked that you simply listen to what we have to say, look at the documents. You have done that, and I want to express my appreciation to every member on the Senate floor for the civility of the discussion. The other thing that I would really like to do at this point is, and I have withheld up to this point, of thanking Senator Carlson for all of the work that he has put in on this over the years. He has worked on this for many years. He has helped me a great deal along the way this year and last year when I worked on this bill. And I just want to acknowledge his service and his work and thank him for what he has done to date. The other folks that I would like to thank at this point is the staff in the Senate Transportation Committee in particular, some of whom are standing right behind me. And these would be both the partisan and the nonpartisan staff. I don't know how many iterations of this bill that they have put together for us, or how many hours of research that they have put in for us, and how many difficult questions that they have done their very best to field in putting this bill together. And believe me, because we are dealing with changing technology, it wasn't all that easy. And throughout all of it, they have been helpful and professional, and I want you folks to know about the work that they have done on this bill. The final word I'm going to have on this bill is this, Mr. President. This driving and using your cell phone is a dangerous, dangerous activity. As pointed out by all of the deaths and terrible injuries that we have had across this state. All I'm asking for in this bill, just put your phone down, put your eyes back on the road where they belong. And in the end, I know we're going to save lives. Statistically, we will know that. What we won't know is who didn't die because you put your phone down. Thank you, Mr. President.
Final discussion, Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, just to be brief, there was a time when the majority of us, or at least the majority of us that are older, never wore seat belts. And then in 2005, 2006, there was conversation about seatbelt laws, of which I opposed. But guess what? Today, virtually everybody wears their seatbelt. It's common practice, it's habit. We changed habits. We didn't need large fines. We just changed the law and said this is important. We changed DUI from 1.0 to 0.08, and guess what? We have less fatalities on the road from drunken driving. In fact, for the first time in a long, long time, it went from 50% fatalities from alcohol down to 33%, just because we made a few changes to the law. And so this is another one of those situations. The smartphone, something that we've never had before, and has suddenly become so important to us in our daily life, but somehow we can't separate it from ourselves even when driving. And this is a step that I'm convinced will make the difference. And so, members, I would encourage a green vote today.
Members, we're on final passage of House File 50 as amended. Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll. All senators having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 10 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, please no applause in the gallery. Members, moving to the 13th order of business, announcements of Senate interest. Without objection, the following senators will be excused from today's session: Senator Klein all day, Senator Nelson from 11 to 11:30, Senator Latz from 11 to 11:35. Announcements of Senate interest, Senator Rude.
Mr. President, the Environment and Natural Resources Committee will meet immediately after session in room 1200. We have the room until 3 o'clock, and we have to get out our policy bill today, so I'd appreciate your timely appearance.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. For members that are members of the Judiciary Committee, we will not be meeting this afternoon, but rather we will start at 5 o'clock this afternoon in room 1150.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the Senate Jobs and Economic Growth Committee will be meeting immediately after adjournment.
Members, any other announcements of Senate interest? Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, move the Senate do now adjourn until Tuesday, March 26th at 12 noon.
Senator Gazelka moves that the Senate do now adjourn until March 26, 2019 at 12 noon. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. The Senate is adjourned.